When did religion actually enter Indian society? Not spirituality, not belief, not personal faith or quiet wonder, but organized religion. Religion with named gods, with priests and hierarchies, with rules, authority, and social power. Today, India feels inseparable from religion. Temples dominate skylines. Gods decide calendars. Rituals shape birth, marriage, death, life itself. It feels ancient, timeless, almost inevitable. But here's the unsettling truth. The earliest Indian civilization we know of, the Indus Valley, may not have had organized religion at all. No grand temples rising over cities. No giant statues of gods demanding worship. No priestly class controlling belief. No sacred texts carved into stone. This wasn't a primitive society either. They had advanced urban planning, sophisticated drainage systems, standardized weights, thriving trade networks, yet no clear signs of organized religion. So what does that mean? Did early Indians live without religion as we understand it today? Or were they practicing something quieter, more personal, less controlled? And then comes the bigger question. If religion wasn't always there, when did it arrive? Did it grow slowly, almost invisibly, through stories told around fires, through symbols that gained meaning over generations? Or did it arrive suddenly, shaped by crisis, by migration, by new elites seeking legitimacy and order? Was religion born from devotion, or from the need to organize society, to justify power, to create unity, to explain chaos? What transformed a land of symbols and beliefs into one of gods, rituals, priesthoods, and sacred authority? That's what we explore today. Not to challenge faith, not to deny belief, but to ask a deeper question. How did religion become one of the most powerful forces in Indian society? And why did it take the shape it did? Let's begin. In my previous video, did the Indus Valley Civilization have religion? We examined archaeological evidence from Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. We saw ritual signs, symbolic objects, but a surprising absence of organized religion. If you haven't watched that video yet, the link is in the description below. It sets the foundation for today's discussion. This video takes the story forward. Chapter 1. Defining religion. Before we ask when religion entered Indian society, we need to pause and clarify something important. What do we actually mean by religion? Because belief alone is not religion, and ritual alone is not religion. Humans everywhere have believed in forces beyond themselves. They have prayed. They have symbolized nature. They have honored ancestors. But that doesn't automatically create religion. So in this video, when I use the word religion, I'm not talking about personal faith. I'm not talking about spiritual experience. And I'm not talking about isolated rituals. I'm talking about something more structured, more organized, more powerful. Here, religion means a system that includes named deities, gods with identities, personalities, stories, and roles. Organized rituals, not spontaneous acts, but formal practices, led by trained specialists. Canonical knowledge, hymns, chants, formulas, or sacred instructions. That must be learned, preserved, and controlled. Institutional authority, priests, hierarchies, sacred calendars, and rules that regulate social life. And finally, a worldview that shapes society itself, not just private belief. A system that influences power, hierarchy, law, and identity. This definition matters because it allows us to separate two very different kinds of societies. On one side, ritual-rich societies, communities with symbols, practices, and meaning, but without centralized religious control. On the other, religion-centered societies, where belief is institutionalized, where authority flows through religious structures, where religion becomes inseparable from governance and social order. If we don't make this distinction, we risk projecting modern religion backward into the past and seeing temples where none existed, priests where none ruled, and gods where symbols once sufficed. So before we move forward, this clarity is essential. Only then can we look at Indian history honestly. Only then can we ask, when did belief become religion? When did symbols become gods? And when did spirituality become institutional power? Now, with that definition in place, we can begin the journey. Chapter 2, The Indus Cities, Ritual Without Religion. Let's travel back nearly 5,000 years to the Indus Valley Civilization, roughly 2600 to 1900 BCE. What we find there is astonishing. These were not scattered villages. These were planned cities, straight roads, grid layouts, multi-story houses, drainage systems so advanced that modern engineers still study them today. Standardized bricks, standardized weights, trade networks stretching across regions. This was a civilization that valued order, coordination, and collective life. And when archaeologists began digging, they did find signs of meaning and symbolism. They found seals, covered with animals and mysterious symbols. They found terracotta figurines, human forms, animals, gestures. They found a great bath at Mohenjo-daro, a massive, carefully engineered water structure. All of this suggests ritual life, symbolic life, shared practices. But here's where it gets interesting, because what we don't find may be more important than what we do. No towering temples dominating the city. No priestly quarters set apart from common homes. No images of kings as gods. No massive sacrificial altars with layers of repeated offerings. This absence is striking, especially when we compare the Indus world to civilizations like Egypt or Mesopotamia. There, religion was loud. Temples were monumental. Priests held power. Gods ruled the skyline and society. The Indus world is different. It is quiet. Meaning doesn't seem centralized. It doesn't flow from a priestly class. It doesn't dominate through gods or rulers. Instead, meaning appears embedded in daily civic life, in water management, in cleanliness, in shared urban space, in balance and order. This wasn't a society without belief, but it was a society without organized religion, as we recognize it today, and that matters, because it tells us something crucial. Religion, organized religion, was not inevitable. It did not automatically arise. The moment humans built cities, it had to emerge later, under different pressures, for different reasons. And that leads us to the next question. If the Indus cities thrived without organized religion, when did religion finally enter the picture? And what changed to make it necessary? That's where our story goes next. Chapter 3, A World in Transition. Around 2000 BCE, the Indian subcontinent begins to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically overnight, but steadily, unmistakably. Rivers shift their courses. Climate patterns become less predictable. Rainfall changes. Some once thriving urban centers begin to decline. The great, orderly cities of the Indus world slowly lose their centrality. People adapt. Populations become more mobile. Communities disperse. Smaller settlements replace large cities. Life becomes less stable and more uncertain. And when societies fragment, something very human happens. Rituals become more important. Because in uncertain worlds, ritual does something powerful. It creates predictability. When nature feels unreliable, it creates shared meaning. When communities are scattered, and it creates social cohesion. When old structures no longer hold, lighting a fire the same way, reciting familiar words, repeating inherited gestures. These acts reassure people that some order still exists. But here's the key point. Ritual alone is not religion. Ritual can exist without gods, without priests, without institutions, without authority. What matters is what comes next. Because in periods of prolonged stress, when mobility increases, when communities mix, when leadership must be justified, ritual begins to change. It starts to require specialists. It starts to demand correct performance. It starts to accumulate authority. And that transition, from shared ritual to organized religious systems, is the most crucial turning point of all. What happens next will reshape Indian society permanently. And that's where our story truly turns. Chapter 4, the Vedic horizon. From around 1500 BCE onward, the historical record changes dramatically. For the first time, we step into a world that speaks clearly to us. We encounter the Vedas, not written down at first, but preserved through extraordinarily precise oral transmission. Every syllable remembered, every accent guarded, every word protected across generations. And with the Vedas, something new becomes unmistakable. Now we see named gods, not vague forces, not abstract symbols, but identifiable deities. Indra, the warrior of storms. Agni, the fire that carries offerings. Varuna, the guardian of cosmic order. Soma, both substance and divinity. Alongside them appear sacrificial rituals, complex, exacting, and unforgiving of error. Rituals that require specialist knowledge. Rituals that cannot be performed by just anyone. We also see the rise of priestly families, lineages that guard ritual authority, knowledge, and access to the sacred. And we see canonical hymns, verses believed not just to describe the universe, but to sustain cosmic order itself. This is no longer just shared ritual. This is something fundamentally different. This is organized religion. Religion now begins to do powerful things. It structures social hierarchy. Who performs, who receives, who obeys. It legitimizes power. Kings rule not just by force, but by ritual sanction, and it shapes moral order, defining duty, obligation, and place in the world. This moment matters, because once religion becomes organized, it becomes institutional. And once it becomes institutional, it doesn't just reflect society, it reshapes it. This is the turning point. From here on, religion will no longer sit quietly beside life. It will stand at its center, and India will never be the same again. Chapter 5. Two Social Engines of Change. Engine 1. Power and Legitimacy. As societies grow more complex, they don't just grow larger, they grow unequal. Elites emerge. Resources concentrate. Authority separates from everyday life. And power creates a problem, because raw power is unstable. Elites need justification. Why them and not others? Kings need cosmic approval. Force alone cannot rule for generations. Inequality needs explanation. Otherwise, it invites resistance. This is where religion becomes useful. Large public sacrifices display not just devotion, but wealth and control. Only those with surplus can afford to give so much to the gods. Priests step in as intermediaries, claiming knowledge of rituals, hymns, and cosmic laws. They don't rule directly, but they legitimize those who do. Myth, then, does its most powerful work. It transforms power into destiny, hierarchy into cosmic order, obedience into duty. The king no longer rules because he conquered. He rules because the universe itself demands it. At this point, religion is no longer just belief. It becomes a technology of rule, a system that stabilizes authority, organizes society, and makes inequality feel inevitable. Engine 2. Mobility and mixing. Now, consider a different pressure. As populations move and mix, through migration, through trade, through climate stress and settlement shifts, old systems begin to loosen. Local traditions meet unfamiliar ones. Rituals overlap. Stories merge. Gods acquire new names and roles. Older civic systems, once held together by stable cities and shared routines, begin to fade. In their place, new identities must be built. Ritual becomes the glue. But ritual in a mixed world cannot remain informal. It must be standardized. It must be taught. It must be performed correctly. Slowly, hybrid ritual systems crystallize. What was once flexible becomes formal. What was once communal becomes hierarchical. What was once shared becomes guarded. Specialists emerge. Lineages form. Authority consolidates. Religion takes shape, not because gods suddenly appear, but because society now requires structure. Chapter 6. Crisis and the Psychology of Ritual. Crisis changes how humans think. When the environment becomes unstable, when floods fail, when drought arrives, when familiar rhythms collapse, People don't respond with philosophy. They respond with behavior. They seek control because uncertainty is psychologically unbearable. When nature no longer obeys expectation, humans look for patterns they can control, and ritual becomes that anchor. Across cultures and time, environmental stress amplifies ritual behavior. Not less ritual, more. People begin to perform rituals more often. They repeat them more carefully. They become anxious about mistakes because repetition feels like order. Precision feels like power. Gradually, something shifts. Those who appear most confident in ritual, those who claim knowledge of correct words, correct timings, correct gestures, begin to stand apart. Ritual experts are elevated, not necessarily because they are wiser, but because they offer certainty when a world feels unpredictable. Next comes codification. Rituals that were once flexible become fixed. Variations are discouraged. Innovation becomes dangerous because in times of crisis, change feels like risk. Rules emerge. Sequences are formalized. Errors are feared. And with that fear, authority consolidates. But here's the crucial insight. Crisis does not invent religion. Belief already exists. Ritual already exists. Symbols already exist. What crisis does is accelerate institutionalization. It compresses timelines. It hardens practices. It rewards certainty over openness. Under prolonged stress, societies don't ask, what is true? They ask, what works? And whatever appears to work, whatever seems to restore order, becomes sacred. This is how flexible ritual turns into fixed system. This is how shared meaning turns into guarded authority. And this is why religion so often grows strongest. Not in times of abundance, but in times of fear. By now, the pattern should be clear. Religion does not emerge from calm reflection. It emerges from instability, uncertainty, and a human need for control. And once institutionalized, it rarely disappears. It adapts. It reshapes itself, and it carries the memory of crisis. Long after the crisis itself has passed, that psychological imprint is one of religion's most enduring forces. Chapter 7, a short synthesis. So when did religion enter Indian society? The honest answer is, it didn't arrive. Not suddenly. Not at a single moment. Not as a single invention handed down intact. There was no day when belief turned into religion. Instead, it formed. Slowly, gradually, almost invisibly. If we step back and look at the long arc, a pattern becomes clear. Before 2000 BCE, we see societies rich in ritual, but light on institutions. Symbols mattered. Practices mattered. Meaning was present, but it was woven into daily life, not controlled by gods, priests, or hierarchies. Then, between 2000 and 1500 BCE, the ground begins to shift. Environmental stress, migration, social fragmentation. Ritual expands, not because belief deepens, but because uncertainty grows. People seek stability. Communities seek cohesion. Ritual becomes more frequent, more precise, more authoritative. Between 1500 and 1000 BCE, something decisive happens. The Vedic system crystallizes. Named gods, canonical hymns, specialist priests, correct performance. Religion becomes institutional, not just practiced, but organized, not just meaningful, but authoritative. And after 1000 BCE, religion continues to evolve. Temples rise, icons take form, regional traditions merge and adapt. Older rituals blend with new philosophies. Local gods are absorbed into larger systems. Religion spreads deeper into everyday life. By this point, religion no longer explains society. It structures it. So religion didn't arrive in India like a foreign idea crossing a border. It emerged from within, from ritual, from crisis, from power, from psychology, from social need. It formed because societies changed. And as societies changed, religion changed with them. That is the deeper truth. Religion is not a beginning. It is a process, and understanding that process allows us to see Indian history, not as timeless inevitability, but as human response to a changing world. Understanding this matters because it reminds us of something essential. Religion is historical. It is shaped by time, place, and circumstance. It does not float above society untouched. It responds to it. Religion grows when societies grow. It hardens when fear rises. It organizes when power needs legitimacy. And it adapts when meaning is questioned. This does not make religion false. It makes it human. India's religious depth is not diminished by this truth. It is enriched by it, because what survives centuries of change, of migration, crisis, debate, and reinterpretation, is not fragile belief. It is resilient meaning, seeing religion as something that formed, rather than something that simply appeared, allows us to appreciate its layers: ritual and philosophy, power and poetry, fear and transcendence. India's religious traditions are deep, not because they are frozen in time, but because they have continuously responded to the human condition. Understanding that history doesn't weaken faith, it deepens understanding, and that perhaps is the most honest form of respect. In the next video, we'll explore a deeper question. When did Hinduism, as a named and self-conscious religion, truly take shape? Was it ancient, or did it crystallize much later, in response to historical encounters? Subscribe if you want to explore history without myths, without fear, and without shortcuts. Thank you for watching.